Great. Well, welcome everyone. This is Patrick Roach from the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, and we're going to start our webinar today talking about peak demand and capacity costs. And I'd like to thank returning participants to our program who have been working with us to reduce load for the last couple of years or maybe just a year, and also welcome new municipalities who are interested in exploring this. We hope that, I think there'll be something for everyone today. We are recording the webinar, so the slides and the recording will be made available afterwards. And everyone is muted right now. We ask you to send any questions using the Q&A box, not the chat box. And we will have time at the end for questions. So today I'm going to be joined by my colleague Brooks Winner here at MAPC, as well as Roshan Bhakta from Eversource, Paul Wassink from National Grid, and then from Boston Public Schools we have Ellie Nassif, and from the City of Medford we'll have Alicia Hunt. So I will start off today by doing a little background on the concept of capacity charges and peak demand. And then we'll talk about MAPC's peak demand notification program. And then we'll talk about the utility offerings from the Mass Save program, which we have Eversource National Grid on today. And then we'll also hear directly from Boston Public Schools and City of Medford about what they're doing in their buildings, both behavioral implementations and some more complex implementations, like including storage. So we will, I think this next slide that you can see here is, we're going to refer to this kind of graphic throughout. What's great about working on managing your demand is that there are a number of different ways that you can get economic benefits from this, and so there's sort of a value stack. And one of the things I want to impress upon kind of everyone is, we're going to talk about a lot today, but if you're just starting out, you can really dip your toe in the water by working kind of just from the top of the bar, working to say just avoid capacity costs. But then you can evolve as you get more confident to engage in the utility programs, which we're going to hear about, which will offer you payments for reducing demand in both the summer and the winter. And then there's also a program from ISO New England that you can also get another type of payment for reducing demand in the summer and the winter. And so there's a potentially nearly $200 per kilowatt, we'll get into that, value out there if you participate in all of the different programs that are available. So whether you're just starting out, we think there's something for you, or whether you've been doing this for a while, hopefully we can help bring you, give you the information, the tools to kind of take you to the next level. So we'll start out talking about some background, but before we do that, we'd like to launch a little poll just to get a sense for who's in the audience here and what you've been doing. So I'm going to start out with this first poll about what you might have done last summer regarding demand management. All right, great. We're going to give you one more second to answer that, and we'll close the poll. All right. Oh, looks like 10 seconds left. Okay, so take a look at the results here. You should be able to see these on your screen. So looks like we had a lot of participants who did load shed last year. which is very exciting, and we've got some who didn't but are hoping to do it this summer. So, and hopefully for the folks who didn't answer, we can get you into that category of hoping to do it this summer. Then we'd also like to ask just one more question for those of you who are participating in certain programs. We kind of want to get a sense of who's doing what type of program. So we'll open this question up for a little bit. And you can select all the programs that you might be participating in, whether it's MAPC's notification program, something from National Grid or Eversource, or maybe even the ISO New England program, or another program if there's something else out there. All right, I'll just give it a couple more seconds. So about 10 more seconds, and then we'll show those results. Okay, so you should now be able to see those results. So it looks like we've got a healthy mix in both MAPC's program and one of the utility programs, and a surprisingly high number in the ISO New England Emergency Response Program, which is also really exciting. So those are all different parts of that chart that I showed, and we'll be talking a lot more about that today. So with that, we'll get back to the presentation. So for background on the capacity charges, this is a graph from ISO New England, and it shows on the vertical axis the demand on the grid, and on the horizontal axis it's the percentage of time that we're using that demand. And so what essentially it's showing is that a quarter of the supply that we have on the grid is only used 5% of the year. And that is a problem for a few different reasons. One, from an emissions standpoint, we generally have to use peaker plants that are less efficient, either oil or maybe natural gas, plants that can come online in a short period of time to ramp up and provide that very short-term demand. And so emissions are much higher during our peak times on the grid than they are for the majority of the rest of the year. The other part is that we, as ratepayers, have to pay to keep all of the supply that we need available on the grid. And so ISO New England, who is our grid operator, has a system where they provide payments to electricity generators for their commitment to exist and generate electricity in the future. And so they collect that revenue from all the ratepayers, and if we can, and they're collecting that for the worst case scenario, the highest demand scenario. So they have to collect it to cover the most demand that we have at any one time. And this graph is also from ISO New England. If you look at what's been happening to our electricity use over time, the orange line is our net annual energy use. And you can see that since about 2005, that's been trending steadily downhill, thanks to lots of energy efficiency and behind-the-meter solar coming on. However, the bars are our annual system peaks, and those have really not moved. And so even though we are reducing our net energy use per year, we're still having to size the system about the same size and pay to keep that kind of generation online. So when we talk about demand, I'm going to be talking about the capacity charge. Then the capacity charge is what ISO New England is collecting to pay these generators. On your electricity bill, you have largely two parts. You have the delivery portion of getting the electricity to you. That's the wires and poles that get the electricity to you. And then you have the supply, which is your actual electricity. And it's in the supply portion where the capacity charge sits. And for most of the municipalities, on the phone, your community, your municipality is probably contracted with a third-party supplier, for some sort of supply rate. And so your capacity charge is included some way or another in that supply rate. So the charge is the product of the price of capacity, and that's set by ISO New England in an auction. So everybody pretty much pays the same price for capacity. But it's multiplied by the quantity of demand, and that quantity is really under your control. And so that's where through behavioral mechanisms or installing different hardware, you can reduce that quantity and reduce that capacity charge. To put it in dollars and cents terms, this year the capacity charge, or the price of capacity, is about $7 per kilowatt. And across some of your largest facilities in your municipality, it's conceivable that you might have 1,000 kilowatts of demand. And so that would translate into a cost of about $7,000 per month, or nearly $84,000 per year. And the quantity that you're being charged for is the quantity of demand that you have during the single highest demand hour on the grid for the whole year. So it might not be the single highest hour of demand in your building, but it's that hour on the grid. And so what you do during that 1 hour determines the quantity of demand that you're going to get charged for. So this graph kind of illustrates maybe what the usage that might be happening in, say, your high school or something, where the black line is what your demand would do throughout the day, but on the day when we expect it to be the peak day, during what we expect to be the peak hour, you're going to want to try to reduce your facility's usage so that you're going to be billed for a lower quantity. And the typical buildings that we're going to see this in are your largest buildings, because in order to determine the quantity, you need to have an interval meter which reports the usage every 15 minutes. And so those are only on your largest buildings like high schools, middle schools, libraries, wastewater treatment plants. And down below we've listed a couple of the applicable account numbers that they might be, but we recommend the easiest way is to talk to your supplier or your utility rep and find out which buildings have a capacity charge, and also recommend asking for what that quantity is. The way people usually refer to it is called an ICAP tag. The cap tag is often shorthand for what the quantity of demand that you're getting charged for is. So the way this works in terms of timing, ISO New England has a calendar that's kind of close to the fiscal year. It's June 1st to May 31st. And what your usage and demand this summer will determine the cap tag that you get charged for starting next summer. So it's sort of a year in advance process. And so, for example, what you used last summer, in the summer of 2018, determines the cap tag that you're going to be charged starting this June 2019. So if you haven't taken any action yet, this is the kind of thing that will help you. Taking action this summer will help you next year. These are a couple of graphs. Just the first is the annual peak load going back to 2003, and you can see that it's generally been going down, although last year we saw a surprisingly high spike back up, which was a little concerning. The other graph below is the time, the actual 1 hour of the peak, and you can see for a long time it was basically about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. That was the prime hour. But more recently, it's been oscillating between starting at 4 o'clock or starting at 2 o'clock, and that has a lot to do with the penetration of solar on the grid, possibly pushing the peak hour that we see later, because there's a lot of behind-the-meter solar. So with that, we're going to talk about MAPC's peak demand notification program. And what we are doing is, I think we're kind of an on-ramp for a lot of communities to managing demand and getting into this world. Our program is really focused just at that first bar of avoiding the capacity costs. And when I say avoiding those, that can come in two forms for your community. So you have your supply contract, and that might be a fixed rate supply contract. You might have say it's 10 cents per kilowatt hour, and that's what your community is getting charged. Or you might have a contract that, say, it's 9 cents per kilowatt hour, but there's a pass-through for the capacity cost. So you pay that 9 cents, and you also pay whatever the capacity charge is. If it's that latter, that pass-through model, if you avoid these costs, that shows up, it's going to show up directly because you're going to have a lower capacity cost to pay. If you have a truly fixed cost, then it's probably going to help you next time you go out to bid, because the suppliers are going to look at your capacity, your ICAP tag, and when they figure out how much to price for your fixed price. So the benefits can come a couple different ways depending on how you've contracted. So MAPC has an email, a daily email that goes out by 10:15 each morning, and it gives a 7-day look ahead for the risk that any one of those days could be the peak day. So you can see an example here where it looks out 7 days. We have sort of a stoplight approach, and so green is unlikely, don't really have to do anything. Yellow is possible, where it's close to what we think the peak could be for the year. It's kind of in a little bit of a gray zone, because the numbers we're using are estimates from ISO New England, and so the actuals can have some variance. So the possible days are ones where you might want to implement those a load shed or reduce demand if you can. The likely ones are where you definitely want to, and you can see that on the day of, the furthest to the left, we not only give you the rating for the day, but the exact hour that ISO estimates that the peak will happen. And ideally, you could do your demand reductions for longer than that hour, start a little earlier, end a little later, because it's not, again, ISO is estimating that, say in this case, 3 to 4 p.m. will be the peak, but it's possible that given the actions of everybody else on the grid, that might shift a little bit, might go a little earlier, might go a little later. So it can be helpful, if you can, to have your demand reduction event extend a little longer. I'm going to turn over to Brooks to quickly talk about our results from last summer.
Great. So as Patrick said, we've been doing the demand reduction program since about 2015 and have grown steadily since then. But the results from last year, we had about close to 60 communities participating and 18 municipalities that we know actively reduced demand upon receiving those notifications during the summer last year. You can see a bunch of them here, ranging in size and also, throughout the MAPC region and some outside of the region. And from just, I think, about 6 of those communities who we followed up with, we saw estimated avoided costs or savings of about $450,000. So as Patrick was outlining, the savings can really add up, particularly if you're participating in multiple programs, but just from those avoided costs, they can be pretty significant. So you can see the average reduction was about 6.7 megawatts, nothing to sneeze at there, but some pretty significant results from last year's participation. And then, we can see, as Patrick said, the sort of the most common buildings are the larger ones, and so a lot of school buildings participating, as well as city or town facilities, town hall, city hall, that sort of thing, and then some water and wastewater facilities. If you want to go to the next one. And this is just a more granular look at that. Overall, high schools are the most common, making up about 35% of the total buildings participating, as well as middle schools and town halls. So if you're new to this kind of demand response work, I think those are the places to start, and obviously checking to see where you have those interval meters installed. But yeah, this will just give you a sense of the kinds of buildings that people have been participating with.
Awesome. So this is an example of, from Lynn, a few years ago, kind of laid out for us how they go through developing a program like this. And I'm going to sort of gloss over this a little bit, but I would suggest you come back, because it does talk about how you get buy-in from leadership to implement these programs, what types of activities you do. You can see that a lot of their actions are around reducing AC set points, HVAC, reducing lighting where you can, where it's not necessarily needed, and then kind of thinking about anything else that's not life safety and how you can reduce it. But it does. We're happy to have this webinar so early before the season, because if you really want to do this for the first time, you do want to make sure you have time to be able to explain this to school or town leadership, and kind of put together a plan for how you're going to implement your demand reduction activities on a day where an event is called. And in MAPC's program, we probably have between 4 and 8 likely days per summer. We don't want to miss the day, but we also don't want to cry wolf and have too many calls. So it's probably somewhere between 4 and 8. We definitely would encourage you to familiarize yourself with the ISO New England website. There's a little information here about how you can track the real-time demand on the grid on one of these peak days. That might be very interesting to you. And if you don't have their app, the ISO2Go app is actually a really great, useful app. It also allows you to track the current actual demand. So that's something great to have as well. So now I'm going to turn it over to Roshan and Paul. And again, just coming back here with their programs, they're targeted at payments around demand reductions, but generally they're going to coincide with, their events are going to coincide with the summer peak, and so that's why we have a dotted line you can probably do the avoided capacity costs with them as well. And they're also, the other dotted line, through their providers, you can also get into the ISO New England program. So we will, they'll talk about that. So I'm going to turn it over now and try to give presenter privileges to Paul.
Can you guys see my screen?
We can.
Yep. Awesome. So I'm Paul Wassink with National Grid, and I'm co-presenting with my colleague at Eversource, Roshan Bhakta.
Hey everyone, Roshan Bhakta here, Eversource. So I'm going to kick it off, and Paul, you can go ahead and scroll through. We recently, the big update from between the presentation that Paul and I gave this group last year and today is that over the course of this past year, we've had a new energy efficiency plan approved by the state, and we run our energy efficiency programs in these 3-year cycles. Before, Paul and I were talking about what we were calling demonstration projects, and now we're running full-blown programs. So in this last 3-year efficiency plan, we were given 2 system-wide problems to try to address. The first one is the summer peak problem, and Patrick did a great job of illustrating, a few of those issues. A small number of hours accounts for a very, very large portion of the capacity. So that's our summer problem. We also have this issue in the winter, and I tried to illustrate that with the graph on the right-hand side. The different colors represent different types of electricity generation in the wintertime. And during real cold snaps, we need to divert a lot of the natural gas for heating purposes and bring on oil and other types of fuels to generate electricity. So the big black blob there is actually oil coming online for generation for those few cold days, and that generally coincides with very high electrical prices as well. So we wanted to design some programs that can help address those high price, very, very dirty generation hours during the winter as well, not just the summer. So all that being said, all of the PAs in Massachusetts, we signed up to do this and we're all on the ISO New England grid. So we're all targeting those same periods of the year, whether it's in the summer or the winter. And because of that, we all have a similar flavor of our program offerings. And we've also allowed in this 3-year energy efficiency plan for flexibility in supporting all kinds of technology, including energy storage. So just quickly on our summertime goals, we're ramping up the goals across the state in this next 3 years, and certainly beyond 2021, we don't see this program going anywhere and kind of only growing from there. But we have designed offerings for both residential and commercial programs. We're not really going to talk too much today about the residential offerings, but just know if you're meeting with residents or constituents in your towns, we will be rolling out some residential programs really targeting smart Wi-Fi thermostats, behind-the-meter storage, electrical vehicle charging, really connected devices on the residents. Today we're going to dive into the C&I offerings, and in our 3rd year we're going to be targeting around or over 200 megawatts of summer capacity. And then jumping forward to the winter program, much smaller, much less potential in the winter. Again, ramping up, but really only ending around 40 to 50 megawatts in the winter. There's just a lot less potential to reduce load in the winter, so not all things are applicable to be reduced that time of year. I think you can jump forward, and I'll kick it over to Paul to talk about the 3 different dispatch strategies that we designed.
Thanks, Roshan. So what we've been doing for the last few years is this targeted summer program, and that's very similar to what the MAPC has been doing too, really targeting those summer peaks. And this is still, as Roshan was saying, the largest part of our programs is really trying to reduce those peak hours of the year. But new this year, we're adding 2 additional options, daily summer and winter. Daily is really, we'll be calling events almost every day of the summer. Now, very few customers can decrease their energy use that often unless they're using some kind of energy storage, like a battery or thermal storage. So our program really lends itself to those technologies. And winter it's very similar to our summer program. It just calls, a handful of times in the winter to address, days where we have to switch to oil. So going over just a few specifics of our targeted summer program, which is really our flagship product. This happens in the summer, so June through September. We'll call a maximum of 8 events per summer. Now, we've only been doing this a few years. The first year we did this, we called it 2 events. The second year, we called 6 events. We have to call more than 1 event. I mean, really, we're aiming for that one magical peak hour of the year. But we have to call more than 1 event because nobody knows when that peak is until after it's happened. Same thing, these events last for 3 hours. Now, if we had a crystal ball, an event would last only for 1 hour, that one peak hour. But you don't know when that one peak hour is going to be. So make sure we hit it 3 hours. Now, although here it says 8 events maximum, that really is a maximum. This program is really aiming at calling as few events as possible while still being sure we can hit the peak. The peak is always on a weekday, so it's not on weekends, it's not on holidays, and we get day-ahead notification. At 1 p.m. the day ahead, we'll tell you tomorrow is the day. Now, one difference between, so these are events, I should say. We pay you whether it's the peak day or not. So even though we might call you a handful of times this summer, you're never wasting your time. All the times you curtail go towards your incentive. There's no penalty to participating. So if you just can't do it one day or something happens or that key person's not on staff, you're never going to end up paying us. It's a pay-for-performance program, so poor performance will affect your overall season results, but you don't have to ever worry about being out money. And it's also a key component is it's not an all or nothing proposition. It's not like you have to run over to your fire station and shut off your power, right? It's whatever you can do and everything helps. Let me show you an example of that. So we have meters on all large commercial, industrial, and municipal buildings. So we know what a building's baseline typically is, and that's this blue line here. During a demand response event, we can also measure that building and see how it goes down during a demand response event and then goes back up again. And we pay for that curtailment. So in this example, if this customer had curtailed more, we would have paid them more. And if they had curtailed less, we would pay them less. Notice that although this customer is doing a great job and he's going down quite a bit, he's not going to zero. He's not shutting down all his facilities. And if this customer couldn't have done all that, he could have done, a little bit less. We'll take whatever we can get. Okay, so that's our targeted demand response program. That's really our key program. But let me jump back and cover the other ones too. So our targeted program pays $35 per summer and calls, 3 to 8 times per summer. Our daily dispatch summer also calls in the summer, and it pays a lot more, pays almost 10 times more, but we're also calling 10 times more events. So, like I said before, that's really for something like battery storage. Now, I know a lot of municipalities don't have battery storage yet. However, we've been hearing for years that customers are interested in this, and we didn't really have a product to offer them. So now we have it. So if you're interested in an energy storage project, please reach out to us. We'd love to see how we can make that happen. And our winter program, which calls in the winter time, very similar to the summer program, but it pays a little bit less. Also, for the summer program, for targeted dispatch, we have the benefit that customers pay both on their ICAP reduction on the supply side at the same time that they're responding to our events. So there's like that natural double dip there, which is awesome. That's not necessarily true on the winter side. So, makes winter just a little bit harder. So this is our battery program, or our daily dispatch program. Like I said, we'll call 3 to 60 times per summer. The events last from 2 to 3 hours. They're somewhere between 2 and 7. Now I know that math doesn't quite add up. There's more hours than 2 or 3 between that. That's because there's a moving window there. Sometimes we'll call from 2 to 5, other times from 3 to 6. But without customers know that a day ahead. Never on weekends, never on holidays. And one special component of this option is the incentive is locked for 5 years. That's because if you're going to install an energy storage system, you're putting out a lot of money. So you need some kind of financial assurance that that incentive's not going anywhere for a while. Now, after 5 years, we still hope to be offering this program, and customers will be entered in at whatever the incentive rate is at that time. It's not like the incentive completely goes away, but it is locked down for the first 5 years.
And Paul, if you could maybe do another 5-ish or so minutes, that would be awesome.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Winter program in the winter time pays a little bit less. Now, one interesting idea about the winter programs for municipalities is streetlights. We've never done DR with streetlights before. However, we're interested in the idea. There's a few questions out there like how will we get the load data? Are there any safety concerns? So if you have a smart street lighting system and you're interested, please reach out to me if you're in National Grid Electric territory, or Roshan if you're in Eversource territory, and we'd love to work this out. Okay, so this is the 3 options again, and this is really just to show the many ways a customer could decrease their energy use, through targeted, through daily, or winter. And the real gist of this is just as technology agnostic. It's a pay-for-performance program. Last year we had 38 schools participate in National Grid service area. Came out to about 3¼ schools per city. The average performance for all those schools was 67 kilowatts. That comes out to about $2,000 per school. A top performing school, a rather large high school, curtailed 262 kilowatts. That's $7,000 just for that high school every single year. And they do this by pretty low-cost measures like manually setting back thermostats, doing their setbacks early, turning off rarely used lighting, or even a generator or turning off a pool pump. Okay, now I'll hand it back to Roshan.
So I will be very quick. I know we're running out of time here, but essentially the Eversource offerings, we're really mirroring what National Grid and Paul have laid out. You heard him talk about the $35 per kW in the summer, the $25 per kW in the winter, and the $200 for daily dispatch in the summer. Beyond that, Eversource is rolling out a few different tranches of incentives specifically for storage assets. So in the summer, if you want to target dispatch a storage asset instead of the $35, we've kicked that up to $100 per kW. And in the winter, instead of $25, we've kicked it up to $50 per kW specifically for storage technology assets. And we are also offering some metering assistance stipend, $1,500 in order to install the required metering for this program because we are requesting real-time telemetry. So we are offering a stipend for metering as well. Jump ahead. And as far as Eversource's examples, we were running a demonstration last year, like I mentioned, and similar to Paul, we had several schools participate, and I've just pulled some anonymized data here of 2 schools that did participate. At the top, you see there a single event and what that looks like for them, and then along the bottom, what their summer looked like as far as participation in the program. So the school on the left was just at their targeted performance or right around it, and the school on the right really overachieved their targeted performance. They were targeting 300 kW and really went well beyond that. So yeah, I would echo Paul's sentiment in that, yes, it is certainly possible for these types of buildings to participate. And again, echoing what Patrick said, we want to stack all of these benefits, the winter, the FCM, the ICAP, targeted summer, targeted winter. So I guess really figuring out how it works for your project is really needed, and give us a call, which brings us, I think, to the next slides. We have applications, flyers, but really contact Paul or myself for the next steps, and we have these pre-approved vendors to offer curtailment services, C-Power, NLX, IP Keys, and Voltus. And if you're a customer who can directly participate, then give us a ring, but if you really need help getting the first step, call the vendors or call us.
And Roshan, this is Patrick. Can I just ask, I think if I understood, one of the benefits of working with the vendors too is that they often will, they can, if you want to participate in that ISO New England Forward Capacity Market program, they can install that third-party metering device, which gives you, or if you are a participant, gives you that real-time view into what your building is doing.
Yeah, so that those vendors can do it, and that's what Eversource, we're offering a stipend to kind of buy that down, buy the cost of that metering down as well. So you can participate in the Eversource programs and the ISO programs, and all of the vendors we selected do hold capacity obligations for the ISO programs. So you can use them to co-participate with National Grid and Eversource plus the ISO forward capacity market.
Awesome, great. And Paul, is there anything you want to add to that? When the National Grid program, I don't believe you need the the meter, but you could get it through your providers. Paul, are you still there?
Oh, sorry, I was on mute. Exactly right. Sorry about that. For the National Grid program, your existing meter will suffice. If you want to participate in the ISO programs, our vendors, which are the same as Eversource's, can install a meter to allow you to do that.
Great. Okay. I'm going to take it back over for right now. Paul, are you able to pass the...
I think it passed to me. Do you want me to log out and then log back in so you can take it out?
Oh, yeah.
Sorry, I passed it to ResWeb X4. Should I pass it to someone else?
That might be fine. Could you try the other WebX4?
Oh, actually, since I passed the controls, I can't anymore.
Oh, okay. No problem. All right, great. We're back. Okay. All right, thanks very much. So we're going to ask Brooks to talk about the Clean Peak standard briefly.
Yes, so just a preview of coming attractions. The Department of Energy Resources is in the process of developing a new Clean Peak standard similar to the Renewable Portfolio Standard and the Alternative Energy Portfolio Standard for thermal resources. And this is a kind of an exciting, a first-in-the-nation program that's really going to allow folks who are doing demand response or installing energy storage systems to get what are called Clean Peak certificates. So similar to the RECs that you're used to for renewable projects, there's going to be a sort of a market for Clean Peak certificates, and it's really a program that's designed to make sure that we're using clean energy sources and also incentivizing demand response during peak periods. So they're in the process of developing the rules around that now, and if you have thoughts on what that program should look like, they're accepting feedback on a straw proposal until Friday the 12th, so this Friday. And then that program is going to be in development probably through the rest of 2019 and then launching in early 2020. So stay tuned for more on that, but we're anticipating that that'll just be another piece of the value stack added on top of the programs that we've already talked about.
Great. Awesome. So yeah, so more to come on that. So now we'll pass it over to our municipalities. So we'll turn to Ellie Nassif. He's the Senior Energy Technologist for Boston Public Schools, and we'll talk a little bit about how they've been managing demand in their schools.
Thank you, Patrick. Everybody can hear me?
Yes.
Very good. Boston Public Schools has about 130 some odd buildings that span 12 million square feet. We use about 80 million kilowatt hours per year. So it's in our interest to try to save some money from year to year. It can add up to some major savings whenever we do anything like this type of program. We also have about 26 combined heat and power units, CHPs, that we use during the winter time, and we shut half of those down during the summertime. One of the best part of this program is the daily emails that we get. It helps us prepare for the next day so that we know what our strategy is and we can take certain actions in preparation for these particular events. What we chose to do a little bit different tact. We did not choose to involve our occupants and our people who are in the buildings. we chose to use the downed CHPs, bring them online during these events. This gives us the option of ratcheting this up in the future in case we want to add more savings. We can always still have the option to go to the occupants and change the temperatures in the building, so we still have somewhere to go. This year, we are going to increase the number of CHPs. We did this last year with, I believe, 3 or 4 CHPs only, and I think this year we're going to go to 7. So we're going to have a little bit more of a demand reduction for this year. We're looking to probably reduce quite a large number of CHPs, of demand this year. Unfortunately, I don't have the numbers in front of me. The person who does just left us very recently, and I wasn't able to get the numbers from him before he left. But it is, I believe we reduced our cost by approximately $150,000 for this year. And we're looking forward to even more next year. And I will cede the rest of my time back to the chair.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Ellie. And folks, if you have any questions, we can get to that in the Q&A. I'm going to turn it now over to Alicia Hunt at the City of Medford and talk about what they're doing. Alicia, I can control it, and you can just tell me when to move.
Great. Thanks, Patrick. So we have, so I realize that none of these say school, but these are all schools in the City of Medford. And we actually really played along to what Patrick was saying would be a good plan. And several years ago, the facilities director for the schools watched the MAPC webinar, and he kind of got this idea about how you could save energy and money. And so he signed up for the email list and started shedding load in our buildings by MAPC's advice. All of these have supply contracts where the capacity is not passed through, but then, we went to renegotiate and get good new pricing, and it was great to have good cap tags on these. So that was going on, and he was doing that. And then when I was approached with the idea of signing up the schools for demand response, I said to him, look, if you're doing this already, there's a way that we could actually get this metered and we could get actual payments back for the work that you're doing. How do you feel about that? And he was comfortable with the idea because they'd been doing it. So to give you a little reference here, the first 4 buildings, McGlynn, Roberts, Brooks, and Columbus, they're 2001, 2003 buildings with energy control systems. So he can log in, the maintenance staff person, there's one for all of these buildings who oversees this stuff, can log into the system and change settings. The high school is a 1969 building. It has much larger energy usage, but there's very little control in that building. There's a lot of manual stuff. The Andrews School we left out because of what I'm going to talk about next. So if you want to flip forward. So this was sort of talking about, he talked to his staff about turning down equipment, turned off lights, and they really focused on just raising the temperature on the AC, turn down the AC, however you want to phrase it. One of the things that we realized is that most of our schools are not occupied during the summer, so our baselines are pretty low. The Andrews School is a pilot project site for a peak demand reduction program through DOER. It's got a bunch of grants to it. We've been working with B2Q Associates to design solar, battery, automated demand response with it. So if you want to flip to the next slide, Patrick, I've put in here our 2018. So the first 2 columns there are exactly the same. 2018, those buildings, they kind of did that same thing manual. You can see that the Andrews School, however, had a much larger amount of kilowatts reduced over the course of the summer. That also had to do with the fact that it was still manual 2018, but B2Q was giving our maintenance staff advice about what would have the most bang for their buck in turning things down. And so if you want to flip to the next slide. So in 2018, he worked with them around raising the AC set points, reducing the variable frequency drives. That building had got all LED lighting, and so we were able to dim the lighting, turned off the chiller. Next year, hopefully by this coming summer, we're going to have solar and battery in there, and the goal would be to discharge the battery. We're also looking at we're also working with automated demand response, so we could get a signal from National Grid that would allow the building to go into demand response mode. One of the techniques that you can do if it's a programmed system is this idea of cycling your HVAC. So you might turn it off for 15 minutes out of every hour and save 25% of the energy. How long you can turn off an HVAC or the fans for it depends on your building, your system, like a number of things. I wouldn't just take that number, but it's not like minute by minute, but sort of turn it off for a section of time, turn it back on without having too much impact on your occupants. So then we are trying to do the winter demand, but it's really hard to do the winter program with schools. Once we have the battery in place, we think we'll really be able to participate in the winter demand program as well, and we'll be able to do some more of this cycling. One of the things that we realized is with all of these buildings, it's one person. So by making it automated, we can take it out of his hands and have it occur more rapidly. I'll just sort of mention these quickly, that we are doing the emergency response program and connected solutions at the Andrews School. We're looking, right now we're evaluating the batteries. So if you flip to the next slide, you can see that for next year, we're not really predicting any change in the other buildings, but we're predicting that we can bring in $13,000. That's before the battery program in particular, but really having the battery to discharge under the current program and having the system automated is what we're looking at there. So we think that's going to have a huge savings for the school and is going to help pay for having this battery in place, which is also being designed for off-grid operations to allow us to use our solar during off-grid. And I think the last slide. Oh, right, there's actually this one. I think this one's actually really useful because this is, so we're National Grid. So the graph that they showed for Eversource a few minutes ago, this is our building under National Grid, their version of it. And you can see our adjusted baseline at the top and the green bars. What those show you is that this was done manually, and he didn't really get to this building until about 3:30, and then 3:15 he really got a lot of stuff turned off. If this had been automated, we would have captured a lot more savings there rather than only partway through the event. The other thing that I realized, or it's sort of obvious from these numbers, there were events in August in the beginning and at the end. That end of August is when school was in session. We had a lot more potential to save when school was in session than when it was just an empty building. It's interesting to me. You would say, well, why did you have anything to save in an empty building? Shouldn't you have been at your lowest level all summer? But we did. We were able to save during the earlier ones. But really, you can see the difference for real. And National Grid looks at your 10 previous days adjusted 10 previous day baseline. And we actually had to have an adjusted baseline because the first day of school was August 28th. So we had teachers in there August 27th, we had a high load, and we had high loads after that because it was an in-use building. But for some of that previous 10 days, the building was essentially an empty building. So this is real savings where we would have been if we hadn't curtailed. And if you want to flip, I think I just wanted to give, this is what we're predicting we can save annually on the solar systems versus what we think we can earn with the battery in the current programs without even the new battery program that he talked about. So I think it's really interesting to be able to see that there's a lot of money, relatively speaking, in this. We're doing this project for more than just dollar savings. This project is about climate resiliency and working off-grid, and it's about solar being the right thing to do and running a building on renewable energy. But it's interesting that the dollars are not so much there right now for the solar piece of the project. I think that's it, and I'm going to flip it back over, and there's like a minute for questions.
Thank you so much, Alicia and Ellie. We really appreciate that. Yeah, so we realize we're running up against time, and we can take some questions. I think, I just want to say here on our question slide, we've got the value stack here again. MAPC's got our program, but I think we'd really encourage everyone on the phone to make sure that that you connect with the utilities, either Roshan for Eversource or Paul from National Grid, because their notifications are probably going to cover the annual peak, so you can avoid those capacity costs, and then you can also tap into the payment streams, at least for the summer, maybe for the winter, and then through the providers that they offer, you can even tap into that final stream that ISO New England, we called it emergency response or the forward capacity market. So yeah, I think coming out of this, really trying to make sure you're in there. MAPC's program will still be available. We'll still be having that our daily email, and a lot of municipalities kind of participate in both because there's no cost. I would say one of the things we do hear from municipalities is it can be sometimes a challenge to get leadership bought into this, to help to explain the concept to them, get them to buy into the types of reductions you're going to be doing in buildings. We are here to help with that. We can help you on sort of doing cost calculations to figure out what type of revenue you might be getting or avoiding. Just how to explain it. So please use us as a resource, Brooks and myself, and yeah, we'd be happy to help. And as Alicia mentioned, sometimes some of the schools, one of the biggest users, sometimes they might not have much usage in the summer, but that might be really different community to community depending on what type of summer programs you might be running or things like that. And of course, there's always those other types of buildings like town and city hall, maybe your police or fire stations, or even wastewater treatment. So a lot of opportunities there. And I think, we've got contact information for everyone here. We have Alicia and Ellie's on the other slides. Definitely, I think, reach out to them if you have questions. Last year, we also had, Martha Grover from Melrose and Molly Ettenborough from Newburyport. So there's a couple other names that I might suggest reaching out to if you're looking for advice on how they've done it. That was also really great. So. Yeah, and we just got a question on, is there a reason why MAPC, Eversource, and National Grid aren't running a uniform peak notification system? And I think that's a good question. It's something that we'll probably, explore a little more after this year. In terms of kind of timing, we sort of started this back in 2015 when actually some municipalities came forward to us with this problem of capacity charges, and then a little after that, both the utilities started some pilot programs, and really just as of January this year, those programs were kind of codified officially in the new 3-year energy efficiency plan for Mass Save. So I think now is probably soon will be a good time to talk about running how we might consolidate those. But the good news is I think over the last couple summers we've seen real close alignment in the days that we're both calling.
Yeah,
so,
Patrick, this is Roshan. I would just say that essentially we're all hunting and trying to predict that one peak hour in the summer, and so we should in general be aligned with the times of year or the days that we're calling events. Both Eversource and National Grid, we partnered with a few third-party vendors who run analytics on the ISO system, as well as taking in data from our own transmission and distribution system, forecasting, and things like that. So essentially, I would say all three of us we're all looking for that same hour and should generally be aligned, but we might be coming at it from a different lens.
Yeah, Paul, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
No, perfectly said. I think as we do this a little bit longer, we will at some point coalesce along one discharge call, but we're still relatively new at this.
Yeah, and I would just say from what we've heard from other municipalities too is getting that meter where you can see the real-time usage in your facility is really valuable, because if you don't have that third-party meter installed, then the utility does get your data, but they get it, the next month when they do the bill read. You don't really get it real time, and it can be really helpful to see actually what's going on in your building when these events are called. And so that's something that, as both Paul and Roshan mentioned, that third-party meter is available through their programs, and I definitely encourage communities to look at that. So we don't have any other questions. I don't know if anyone else on the phone or Ellie or Alicia have any other. Oh, we do have one question. Is the meter you're talking about for B5 meters only, or do they include B7 as well? That sounds like an Eversource rate question. I guess what we were just saying, why don't you go ahead?
I think that question came from Chris, and Chris, I think it's probably easier if you just shoot me an email afterwards and kind of getting into these different rate classes, but kind of high level, essentially, if the meter you have in your facility has a pulse, the third party will just tap into that existing meter, that existing pulse, and put in just a device that can transmit it up to their cloud.
Mm-hmm.
So, Patrick, this is Alicia. He was getting at something that is actually a little interesting. I'm actually doing this at 2 buildings, and the MAPC program really only helps you with those time of use buildings where you're getting the class where they're looking at your 15-minute interval data, time of use for billing overall. We wanted to do this program with a battery and solar at another building that was not time of use, and we determined with National Grid under a pilot that we could put in this meter at a not time of use facility, and that would give C-Power the data they needed to allow us to participate with our battery in a building that doesn't have capacity charges and wouldn't normally participate, because you can put the meter in.
Awesome. That's really good to know. So, I think for those on the phone, probably starting with your largest buildings that already have intermittent meters, that's probably the main place to focus, but it does sound like it is possible to work, if you have a building that might be really good for load shedding and have a decent size load, it might be possible to still take advantage of some of those pay-for-performance programs, the blue bars there. Great. Well, yes, I would encourage everyone to follow up. And again, for some of the third-party metering devices, there can be a bit of a lead time to install those if they need to. And so I think those need to get installed before, Roshan and Paul can clarify, but there is a date. Maybe it's June 1st. You need to have them installed before, so you'd want to get thinking about that real soon. So, we've got a little under 2 months before that time.
That's right, June 1st.
Awesome. Great. Well, we will circulate this recording and the slides around to everyone, and please be in touch with us or any of the participants today to talk more about it.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much, everyone.